I've named one of the best people to go to hear Quranic recitation. His Quranic recitation was very beautiful. Many people loved it, and he gained a reputation in Medina among the Muslims as one of the best people in reciting Quran. And he was one of the scribes of the Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him. When the Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him, would receive a revelation, he would have a group of people around him to write it down, and he was one of them. He was one of his scribes. And when the Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him, passed away, he was one of the 25 people. He was one of the 25 Muslims who knew the entire Quran by heart. There were only 25 at this time, and he was one of them. So he had a very high status thanks to his incredible understanding of the Quran. He understood the meaning quite well, and people would go to him for advice concerning the Quran. And the Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him, he once came to Ubay and he told him that I have been commanded from on high to share the revelation of the Quran with you, to teach you. And then when he heard this, he became very, very excited, because he knew that if the Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him, had received, he knew any revelation of the Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him, received was from Allah. So they asked him, was I mentioned by name? And the Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him, told him yes. And of course, he was extremely overjoyed. And for the next 2 years, he would stay close to the Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him, and learn from him as much as he could. Anything that the Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him, taught, he would always be there to learn it and add it to his memory. As I said before, he was very well known for his ability to recite the Quran. And Umar, he once told the Muslims when he was the Ka'b, he once told them, if any of you wish to ask about the Quran, then go to Ubay ibn Ka'b. Now, Ubay ibn Ka'b, he was very devoted to the Quran, and he would not allow any mistakes regarding it. Once Umar ibn Khattab, he heard Ubay reading some Quran, and then Umar heard an ayah that he did not recognize. Either he forgot it or he did not know it. So he told Ubay, you have lied. So Ubay was shocked and he told him, no, you have lied. And when a Muslim passing by heard this, he told Ubay, are you calling the Amir al-Mu'mineen, the Ka'b of the Muslim Ummah, a liar? And Ubay told him, I have greater respect for him than you do, but I will not tell him that I will not let him tell me that this ayah is wrong, but I know it is right. He has made an error in this matter. And when Umar ibn Khattab heard this, he told Ubay that yes, you are right and I am wrong. So Ubay was very devoted to the Quran. Once the Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him, he took Ubay with him to his house and he told him, would you like me to tell you a surah of the like of which there is not in the Injil or in the Quran? And he told him, yes, of course. So the Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him, he talked with him a bit, and Ubay was waiting for him to tell him the surah he was speaking of. And finally, Ubay became very impatient, and he told him, O Prophet of Allah, about that surah that you mentioned earlier. And the Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him, told him, what is the surah that you say in each prayer, in every single rak'ah, every single prayer? And Ubay told him, Surah Al-Fatiha. So the Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him, told him, this is the surah. So he wanted to emphasize, to Ubay, the importance of Surah Al-Fatiha. Ubay was very wise, and many Muslims came to him for advice. They'd go to him, and he had great advice for them, and often he would advise people, and they would come to him seeking his advice. And so, of course, because of this, he had a very high status in Muslim society. But he never became a governor. During the time of Umar, when Umar was the Ka'b, Ubay once came to him and he asked him why he had never made him a governor of any small city. And Umar told him, I'm afraid it would corrupt your religion. And Umar had a point, because Ubay, one of his greatest fears was that his faith, his deen, would be corrupted. He was very cautious to make sure that he followed the teachings of Islam strictly, and he was always afraid of corruption. And whenever he saw a Muslim veering off the straight path, he would warn them and act as a reminder to all the Muslims around him. Whenever he saw something wrong, he would not hesitate to correct it. And for this reason, Umar, since he knew that Ubay was concerned with keeping his faith totally clean, he never gave him the position of governor. The reason Ubay asked him this was because that he noticed that at the time of Umar ibn Khattab, when he was the Ka'b, he noticed that many people were leaving the faith, they were abandoning the faith, they were not becoming their faith was not as important to them as it was during the days of the Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him, and he wanted to correct this. And his greatest fear throughout his entire life was that one day the Muslims would become divided and that they'd fight among themselves. This was his greatest fear, and he was always worried about it, which is why he was always so careful about wanting everyone to only do right. And Ubay passed away in the year 29 Hijriya, 29 years after the Hijrah, during the time of man was the coward. Even though Ubay's story is short, we can learn many things from him. First of all, we see that Ubay was very concerned with the well-being of the Muslim Ummah, and he was afraid that they'd be divided. And as we can see today, many of the Muslim Ummah today is very divided because they're not unified. And this was what Ubay was afraid of. He wanted all Muslims to be unified together, and we should follow this example and establish brotherhood among ourselves. Also, Ubay he loved the Quran. Once someone came to him and he asked him for advice, and Ubay told him to take the Quran as your guide. Always use it as a guidebook for every single aspect of your life. And this is why we have the Quran. It's like a manual for our life. We have to use it to help us out in times of difficulty. And this was what Ubay knew, and this is why he loved. This is why he loved the Quran so much. And these are just a few of the examples that we can learn from the life of Ubay ibn Ka'b. And inshallah next week I'll continue the discussion of the companions' peace. May Allah be pleased with them, inshallah.
Yeah, something with the bird.